Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Fang, Kuga Gaiden, Saturn Tribute Boosted. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. Originally from developer Data East, Fang released to arcades in 1996. Then in 1997, we would see a port on the Sega Saturn, though only in Japan. Now jump to October of 2024, and courtesy of publisher City Connection, we have this version of the title, the Fang Kuga Gaiden Saturn Tribute Boosted, available on the PC, the Xbox, the PlayStation 4 and 5, and the version we're looking at today, the Nintendo Switch version. First off, this is running on City Connection's Saturn emulator, the Zebra engine, so there is going to be some slight input lag. If that's a problem for you, then this is a collection that's probably worth skipping. However, with that said, I feel having Fang and Fang on a collection for modern consoles is awesome from a preservation standpoint. Fang is probably the more unique title, as it's an interesting mecha run and gun, but I have covered that title previously, so today we're looking at Fang, which is a vertical scroller that has some unique speed and chase elements to it, as well as some other interesting elements for your maneuverability. So it's definitely one that I do feel is fun to explore as far as the shoot 'em up is concerned. Ultimately, I would recommend this collection, but for some people where these titles do go on sale fairly frequently, I feel it might be worth waiting for a sale rather than picking up at full price. With all that said, we find ourselves at the Fang main menu. There are a few game modes you can play the game in off the Saturn version, so the normal mode is basically your arcade version. Then we have the extra mode, which rebalances the gameplay and adds in extra content. And last, we have trial mode. This is basically a boss rush, so if you're looking to try the game's chase mechanic, this is a good place to do so. However, for our purposes today, we are going to be checking out the game under normal mode. Once you select your mode, we're taken to our fighter select. There are a total of 8 different fighters you can choose between. Initially, we have the fighters that you see on the top, and then if you press down, you'll be taken to another set of fighters that are available. These ones kind of rebalance things and overall are more powerful. We'll keep it to the default fighters for our purposes today. So you see the stats there on each individual fighter. You've got ones that are balanced and then others that have focuses in other areas such as maneuverability, acceleration, or attack. So for our purposes, we're going to be showing off these 2 fighters today to just give you an idea of some of the gameplay that's present here. Selecting our fighters, we're taken to our pilot select. There's two pilot types available, one in each gender. You've got the fighters on top. These ones will allow you to do a roll maneuver as well as change the position of your fighter. The bottom 2 replace that with just the ability to straight up use bombs. Actually pretty useful. Then once you lock in your pilot choice, we're taken to our speed choice. And this is one of the things that really sets this title apart. So you have auto that will take that away, but then we've got 2-speed and 5-speed. 2-speed is new and unique to the Saturn version, but we'll show off the 5-speed today to kind of give you a bit more of a feel of what was going on with this particular mechanic, which admittedly I am a little mixed on. Once you've locked in all those choices, there is some story that goes on here, and this is an interesting choice for this particular release. All the game is basically the original Japanese version, so all the dialogue that's spoken is not subtitled and in Japanese. It would have been nice, at least since they're kind of running a shell with the Zebra engine as is, to have had some subtitles for those that don't speak Japanese. So we have a little bit of a launch sequence from our mothership, and as far as the gameplay is concerned, we start off with a relatively straightforward vertical scroller. So we have our shot that's available in 2 formats. There's auto fire or normal fire. However, for the Vulcan, you're not going to see much of a difference there. However, you can see some of the difference in strength with just the sheer number of shots between the 2 fighters that we have. Now let's talk about some of the other unique mechanics. So right off the bat, if you look at the bottom there, you can see that we have a speed gauge underneath that's the 1 through 5 for our fighters. So you can change those up and down, thus allowing you to control how fast you're scrolling through the stage. There is a time limit available for our stage, so the faster we go, the quicker we're going to get through the stage. Throughout the course of your gameplay, it is possible to pick up some weapons. So the weapons that you can conclude with, so the Vulcan is one of the 4, but there's also a cluster shot. Then we have the missile that I picked up, which can be a homing missile if you're using it under auto, and lastly, a laser. Now we find ourselves at the first boss. And right before that, I did go and pick up what's called an S unit. That S unit does several things for us. It both gives us a powered up shot. It also allows us to bump up to an even higher speed 6. And then it's possible to jettison that as a bomb, thus dealing additional damage to the enemy. So now we're seeing some of the chase mechanic. The enemy has fallen behind us, and part of the reason that's the case is we were actually going relatively fast. We slow things down, we can fall back behind the boss and attack it to ultimately defeat it. Maybe a little bit too fast. So there's where the interesting mechanics of the gameplay comes into play. You have to adjust your speed up and down to control where you are in relation to a lot of the bosses. There is one boss where you don't have to worry about that, but that comes later in the gameplay. Another thing that the fighter pilot has is the maneuver mechanic, which unfortunately the boss died before I could really show that off. However, the bomber pilot was using bombs throughout the course of that fight, so as you sometimes see, there's this satellite that goes and becomes visible on there, and then we have a bomb that drops on the field, dealing heavy damage to the enemy itself, as well as clearing the enemy bullets. Stage 1 complete. There's a little scene where we're recovered by our mothership, and then we go to the results screen. So over the course of a standard run, the game will have 6 stages. So that's something that's important to keep in mind for your gameplay. The stages themselves, especially if you keep a relatively higher speed, will go pretty fast. So let's see if we can show off a couple of the other weapons and the S unit from that we saw at the end of the first stage. So as far as the S unit, depending on which fighter you take, you will get a different attack for that particular S unit. So for this attack aircraft, that's the attack was called the Blazer. For the Subspace Force, that one's definitely awesome. So we'll wait till you go and until we get it, so you can see just the effect of that, and then I'll go over what it's called. So now let's talk a little bit about the roll mechanics that we have as the fighter. So if you just use your roll by default, you have this kind of spinning roll where you're temporarily invulnerable, and it's also possible to activate a more aggro version of that, where the roll color is red and you deal damage to enemies rather than just simply being invulnerable. So now the Subspace Fighter has picked up the S unit, and we see the awesome gravity laser. So it's just this kind of like black laser that goes and fires both forward and back from the fighter, dealing a pretty decent amount of damage to the enemies as well. So it's kind of a fun one to use. And as far as fighting the bosses are concerned, I feel the lasers are the most effective type of weapon in this particular game. So that's something, at least from my personal experience, that I prefer, is to stick with the lasers. However, for the main stages themselves, maybe the Vulcan or the homing missiles really works quite well. So with the roll mechanic, in addition to having that roll, you can also do other maneuvers, such as this, where you can turn the ship around if you're facing an enemy that's behind you, or it's even possible, unfortunately you do have to wait for it to recharge, it's even possible to change the ship to face either left or right and attack it that way. So we are going a little too slow to keep up with the boss. So we'll bump our speed up and hopefully catch back up. Now slow back down to match speed, and then I'll turn the fighter so we can attack it from this side. Unfortunately, I wish you could flip that around right away, but as I said, you have to wait for that meter at the bottom to charge back up before you can use that. The same is going to be said for the bombs, so fortunately we can just use the bombs kind of fairly freely once those have charged up. The boss is getting away from us again, so we'll speed back up to match. And really, most of the time, your sweet spot's usually around 3 or 4, which works pretty well for most of the stages. And with that, we kind of see the majority of what's here gameplay-wise for Skullfang. Even if you're trying to go and match the speed perfectly, though, one problem I do occasionally see is that the boss will get away. Here we're traveling as fast as we can, and the boss is off the top of the screen. We can see there's a whoever's controlling the speed, if you're playing 2-player, there is a distance meter there, and of course you'll see the display of where the enemy is at with their HP as well. I do appreciate that occasionally we can see the HP, but no matter how perfectly you're handling your speed, it's not entirely possible to always keep up with the enemy, which is a little bit of a frustration for me personally, specifically with the boss of this upcoming next stage. So there we have it. That's Skullfang served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, so first off, I do feel that the chase mechanic, while neat when it works correctly, oftentimes just feels clunky and frustrating, where you're having to juggle the speed back and forth to match the bosses, or sometimes in some of the stages themselves, some of the larger enemies in the stages themselves. Then there's also a little bit of a problem of boss variety. So if we're being real from a real world standpoint, you wouldn't see too many different kind of large mechs in an army, but some of the bosses are repeated, and for a game that only has 6 stages, that is a little bit of a problem. And lastly, we're talking a little bit about the original Saturn port. The original Saturn port itself is a little bit clunky, where we do have some odd pauses in music where it's switching to CD tracks, as well as some slowdown, and you kind of see a little bit more of that when we're playing the game 2-player, so that's something to keep in mind. But on the plus flavor, so overall, I really enjoy the work that's been done with this particular port. So this is going into, a little bit outside of the bounds of Skullfang and talking a little bit about Wolffang as well, but having both those 2 titles available on modern consoles is really appreciated. I mean, Wolffang was available on the PSN for the PlayStation 3, but that definitely was not the case with Skullfang. So having that extra game available is definitely something that I personally really appreciate. Then all the unique combinations you have as far as weapons, fighters, pilots that you can put together in this game, I think really makes for something that's fun and interesting. And you've got the maneuvers you can pull off, like the air brake I did there. If you take a bomber, all the bombs you can use, the unique elements that the S unit brings to the gameplay. There's a lot of interesting mechanics and gameplay that we're seeing featured here. And as far as how things feel, you have a really good classic arcade feel to it. That is definitely one that I feel is worth sitting down and at least giving a few playthroughs, maybe getting a bit of extra skill and practice to ultimately set higher scores and clear the game. In addition to that, talking a little bit about the Zebra engine, so setting aside the problem that I know a lot of people have with it with input lag, I feel that City Connection does an excellent job with it, with not only providing lots of options for the players themselves as far as graphics, so we have some extra graphical options and the ability to even set it to Tate, but you can have some accessibility options in addition to the boosted music. So the accessibility options include being able to turn on infinite continues, changing the recharge rates for the roll and the bombs, that sort of thing. I really appreciate having that kind of thought put into the gameplay. So, at the end of the day, the Wolffang Skullfang Saturn Tribute Boosted is a recommend from the chef, though depending on how much you enjoy these kind of classic shoot 'em ups, then it might be worth waiting for a sale, as oftentimes City Connections titles are on sale and even up to 50% off. Alright, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.